Our next presentation here is going to be with two gentlemen splitting the time, but we're going to kick it off with Ruben's presentation first, and then we'll have this all the way up through about 12:45. I'm going to go ahead and kind of wait till the end again and ask questions and have a mic for you guys so that they get through all their materials. But, I think they might ask for some questions like Wayne did in the middle, so, jump right in and give the feedback. So, all right, thank you.
All right. Thank you, John. Guess we're good. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I know last session here before lunch, there's a survey that has been around for about 12 years, the New Vantage survey that asks data executives roughly the same questions, every year. And I love reading the survey. And you always see roughly the same things. It'll say companies are investing ever more money into technology, into hiring data people. But there's always a missing element. Only about 21% of the respondents actually say they have created a data culture in their organizations. This is 12 years later after all kinds of investments, all kinds of tools, all kinds of decisions. So to me, that's really what I want to focus today in my presentation. What is that missing gap, which is really insights, and how can organizations really start to cross it and actually get more insights out of their data? And I think the technology challenge is effectively solved. There's lots of choices. You make them, and then you go on your way. So how you actually get more insights out of your data is what becomes a much more interesting question. Now, a little background about myself. I work with maybe about 85 companies now, a lot of on the implementation side. So I've been on the simple and complex data projects, the ones that can fail at any moment. So I've seen a lot of the technology element. I've seen a lot of what happens when a company gets a data warehouse and a CDP and all kind of stuff, and also what happens after they actually figure out the technology. And that's really where I think is a lot of exciting things to do. So I want to start here today, just a little assessment. And you can do this mentally, you can do this on paper, you decide. But just a general sense as to how you actually approaching the insights component of your data. So the rating is 1 to 5, 1 being never, and 5 being always, and then you have the numbers in between. And I have 7 questions I want you to think about for your organization, your team. Number 1, we extract useful and actionable insights from our data regularly. So you define what an insight is, but it's typically just something that actually helps the business, helps you make a decision, helps you guide what you're doing, the strategy. Number 2, we connect insights to business decisions. So, I've been in conversations where someone says some fascinating insight from the data that has no relevance to whatever the business is doing. Number 3, we spend significant time converting data into formats conducive to generating insights. So these are stuff like dashboards, reports, summaries, having town halls, meetings where you're discussing, you're debating data. So how much time you're actually spending doing that. Not just the collection and the storage, but the conversion. Our team understands the data and what it means is number 4. So there's a few sessions here about data literacy. This is really what it's trying to get at. How much does your team, and not just the technical folks, but everyone on your team actually understands the data. Number 5, our technology helps us generate more insights. So lots of technology, lots of ways to approach it, but how much is it actually helping you generate insights? Number 6, we know how to measure the value impact of data inside our organization. So all these budgets, all this money companies are spending, how much can you tie that to some kind of return on investment? How much can you connect that to what your company is doing and the impact that's actually helping you do? And 7, we regularly optimize our reporting to be simpler. So, I think data is really like language, right? When you learn the language, you start with the grammar, you try to get a handle of it, and over time, the grammar disappears, goes into the background, and you just converse. And data should be the same thing. As your company gets more background, more context on the numbers, you should be able to actually make the dashboards and the reporting simpler, smaller, easier to understand. So 7 questions, total score of 35. So some general ranges here for you, depending on where you score. 25 to 35 means you're doing really great work around insights. You've been thinking about it, you have been tackling it, and you're really well on your way. If you're in 15 to 24, you really have much more work to do. And this is really where most companies find themselves. They have great technology, they have endless data, but not really enough insights to justify it. It's not really being used to actually impact business decisions. And lastly, 0 to 14. And in this case, you're not really spending nearly enough time on actually how to generate insights, right? So you can take the 7 questions and you start to think about where you might fall. For example, you might not actually have a good process for actually extracting those insights. You have the data, you have the technology, you build the dashboards, but then no one looks at them, right? And they're sort of sitting there in some kind of cloud. So what's really the process for doing that? So the 7 questions start to give you a sense as to where you want to go, where you want to spend time, and how you want to approach it. And when I run this assessment with companies, I always fascinated by the answers, right? There's been so much focus on technology, so much focus on what you can do from a technical perspective, that there wasn't enough focus on why you should do it, how is this actually going to help the sales team, the marketing team, the management team make strategic decisions. And until you start asking those hard questions, then your data kind of sits in a silo, and the silo from the rest of the organization. So let me move on to a few other ideas. I was traveling to Dallas a few years ago, and it was one of these really small planes where the overhead bins are really small. And this person came in, and they were trying to get their bag in, and they were just pushing it in. It wouldn't fit. It really looked like they were going to break the bag or the overhead bin. And the bag then just slid and just went in perfectly. And I think it's a great analogy for what happens when your strategy is missing just a slight edge, right? You can approach things, you can do things in a much better way if you take just a slightly different approach. So I want to give you a few metrics here for how you can start thinking about insights and how to measure it. Being that this is a data-centric conference, having metrics to measure insights can be really, really powerful. So let me share a few with you. First is very classic number of insights. That is, how many insights are you actually generating, right? And some companies know this, some companies don't, right? It's not the data points, it's not the data storage, it's not even how much you're paying in data storage, but how many actual insights you generate weekly, monthly, quarterly, the kind of insights that actually make a big difference in the business.
Is the slide supposed to be changing?
It is not, actually. I only have one slide, and the rest of the things I'm just going to talk through it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good catch. Yeah. So only one slide. So number of insights, right? So do you have this number? Can you pull that out easily and say, yeah, last week we generated 3 insights. Here's what they were. Here's the impact to the business. Very simple metric to track. Number 2 is decision speed. And decision speed just simply means how long it takes you to make a decision, right? Some companies, for example, spend months formulating a strategy. It's a lengthy process, very old school. So to make a strategic decision really takes 6, 9 months, 12 months. And it's the same thing in any other kind of area in the business. Operationally, sales, marketing-wise, how long does it actually take to go from when you see the insight to actually make the decision? And be able to track it, right? If you're hiring, how long does it actually take you to hire people, right? Is this a 6-month process to bring in a senior VP, or is it something that happens much faster? Until you track it, you're not really going to know. And then lastly is just this contribution of data to actually the business, right? And in some companies, you might see a 10, 20%, where any given decision, you can sort of attribute 10, 20% of the success to the data, but be able to track that, be able to see the impact, be able to measure that, and that starts to help you justify those ever-increasing budgets that you might have for your data, right? In many organizations, when I talk to CEOs, they just see this data budget and they accept it because everyone needs data, every company needs data. But the more you can justify it, the more you can actually tie it to success, the easier it is. Let me pause here. Any other questions besides the slides? No? Yes?
This seems like a silly or basic question, but where do you track in a firm how many incidents? Like all of what you're talking about requires then more data, more entry, more tracking, right?
Yes. So the question is, where would you actually track how many insights you're collecting without it becoming onerous, without becoming now having more data and more tools and stuff like that? It's a great question. And you really can just keep it simple. I see clients track this in whiteboards. I see clients track this just verbally in weekly management meetings, spreadsheets. And the point, actually, of the lack of slides is that I'm trying to convey that the ideas are not complex. They're simple. And the more you make them complex, the harder it will be. So I wouldn't overthink it. I wouldn't think, now we need some kind of insight tracking software tool. We really just need, at most, a spreadsheet. At most, a document that is keeping track of these insights, and you're seeing it, right? And this metric, I would argue, unlike other ones, may not actually have a benchmark. It's not a metric that you're always trying to increase and make better. You're just simply trying to have more of it. Because for too many companies, they have no metric at all. And they have all this data, but they actually do not know exactly how it's helping them and how it's actually generating insights. So I would keep it very simple. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, so let me move on to some of the human challenges that get in the way of insights, right? So my contention is that it's not really technology. You don't really need technology to track more insights. You already have it. You guys have data warehouses and data lakes and dashboards and BI tools and all kinds of stuff. But there's a bunch of human challenges that are actually getting in the way of it. I work with all kinds of teams, from the ones out of Silicon Valley, which are very technical, to what a VC partner calls the real economy, which basically means manufacturing, non-tech companies. And there's a disconnect I often see at companies where they bring in all these kind of tools, great data tools, self-service tools, data warehouses, and so on, and it's not actually really matching what the company has in terms of skills. So a highly technical skill, and I work with executives, for example, who love SQL, and you give them SQL and they just want to be in there and running their own SQL, and it's almost like a hobby. And other executives who, of course, hate SQL. They don't know what SQL is. They just want to get the data in some kind of report that makes sense, just be told what the data is. So organizations need to understand what this is and actually be realistic, right? So if you don't have technical people, you might need more data analysts. You might need more data roles. You might need tools that aren't self-service and making it available. And what I see instead is this expectation that no matter what your company makeup is, you're going to get self-service tools, you're going to get all this advanced stuff, and then give it to people. And they will learn it. Doesn't matter how skilled they might be at it, they will learn how to query their own data, how to build their own dashboards, how to interpret their own stuff. And that's just not really true. And you're going to run into a bunch of walls as you try to do this. So you want to think about what is truly the best way of getting data into insights and into the hands of people, and then just go through that route. And whatever that is, you make it work. Number two is working backwards. I find in the data world, the possibilities are endless, right? You can truly track everything. And when I work with teams and they say, we want to track this, we want to track that, it's a really enjoyable conversation if you're very technical. But the question still becomes, why do you want to track that, right? How is this actually going to help you? Is this going to help you with your strategy? Is this going to help you with sales, with marketing? And then simply working backwards from there. And you find that in most companies, you actually don't need that many things. You only need maybe a handful of metrics to understand how the company's strategy is working, to understand how sales is performing. And you don't need to add so much complexity or tools or structure to it, right? So trying to work backwards from the goal, work backwards from where you're actually trying to accomplish in business language, not in technical language, is what starts to get you closer to those insights. Number three is even asking if you actually even need data. I work with several tourism agencies during the pandemic. This is like mid-2020. And as you can imagine, all their charts, which were very beautifully designed, they look broken, basically. The visitor volume had plummeted by 95% in some cases. So they had no data about who was coming in, except to know that no one was really coming into the country. And some of them actually were able to move on. They said, fine, we have no data. We're just going to make decisions nonetheless. based on what we know and what intuition looks like. And it had one client in particular that was just frozen. They just could not move. They would look at their data and say, we have no idea what to do, right? We never seen no data. We never seen broken dashboards. So we have no idea what to do. So in some cases, you really want to start to answer, do we even need data, right? And if your team doesn't need data, then what happens? I've seen decisions in companies where they really work towards this really complex approach to trying to answer a simple question. Maybe it's a strategy, and they have a very in-depth research numbers as to what's actually happening in the organization, what the numbers look like, what the customers are saying, and it's this huge report of data, where maybe in some cases it wasn't even needed. So I wouldn't even question, especially as leaders and executives, do we even need data in this decision, or can we actually move on without it? And lastly, one of the things I always get companies to implement is something I call the WDIM, which is just what does it mean, right? I had a consumer company that did a change to how they charge their customers, how customers can pay for their products. And then as we got some of the data, then the natural next step was to just debate it. What does it mean? If we see a drop here, what does it mean for the company? What does it mean for projections? What does it mean for marketing and sales and a bunch of other things? So being able to have these conversations, meetings, people, and just simply debating what the numbers mean can be just a very simple, obvious start to insights. And instead of just simply accepting the numbers as facts and saying, yeah, the bulk of our customers are in the US, but what does it really mean? And it might mean nothing, right? And if that's the case, then you can actually simply ignore it or move on with it. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about decision making and kind of give you a sense as to how it actually ties together, right? When I talk about decision making, which is a very logical conclusion to, or next step to data, what I hear is consistently the same thing. Companies say we have no issues making decisions. We make decisions left and right. And as executives, I'm paid to make decisions. But when you dig in a little deeper, you start to figure out how do actually decisions get made? What is sort of the framework for a decision being made? Do you look at an outcome and then decide what is the right outcome? Do you look at options and then weigh them against each other? Do you look at obstacles that might get in the way? And there's plenty of examples, right? You look at airlines during the pandemic. Many of them laid off people as travel plummeted. And then when travel rebounded, they were completely caught flat-footed. Air Canada, United, and so on. Ryanair in Europe, on the other hand, did not, right? They actually kept people on furlough. They rotated people through the very small amount of flights they had for about a year and a half. And when they rebounded, they got to bring people back very quickly. So a very simple decision, how do you sort of make the outcome on how to deal with a pandemic? What are the options? What are the potential obstacles? What happens when travel rebounds, as it was bound to do eventually? And how you approach those decisions can really make a difference. And when you have a framework like that, whatever your framework is, it might be 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps, that's where you can start to figure out where insights go in. Maybe you have specific insights around the outcome and how to determine what is the right outcome to tackle, or insights around the options and how you weigh those options, or of course, insights around obstacles, or whatever your framework is. So by having a framework, you can actually start to make it easier for people to contribute and make it easier to know, almost like a process map. Here's the decision that we make, and at each step, 1, 2, 3, we can then actually add insights, and here's where data plays a role. So it starts to become much more obvious how data actually impacts decisions. One of the final things I'll mention here is, I think for companies at the end of the day, the goal is really to make a winning decision, the right decision possible. Not really the data-driven decision. Data might play a role, it might be helpful, but it might not be as well. And that's what I'm trying to convey. Data can help, but what you really care about are insights, and what you even care about even more is just simply making the right decision, and then trying to find the best way of doing that, whether you use data or not. So I guess I'll pause here finally for some questions. Anyone else who might have any?
Any other questions from the group? Okay.